The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending our iOS 8 security enhancements webinar. My name is Nathan Swaim. I'm the president of ANRC, and one of my goals this year was to increase public awareness into all the research we've been doing in the cybersecurity arena. So next week we have a mobile forensics cell tower tracking webinar scheduled. That's more techie stuff around tracking what cell phone towers a cell phone is using for investigations and forensics purposes. And next month, we'll be hosting a malware webinar showing best practices in reverse engineering the latest and greatest malware threats. So let us know if you'd like to be added to our webinar mailing list, and we'll make sure we get you on there. The goal of this webinar is to create awareness about what security enhancements have been achieved in iOS 8 and what user best practices should be followed at work, home, and when you're traveling abroad. Our target audience is system administrators, people that dabble in mobile security, and even casual users that just want to know more about iOS security features they may not know about. So while we could get technically dense here, we've decided to keep things at a higher level at first and see if there's interest in more hacking and technically dense webinars for the future. If you'd like to see more detail after you've seen the webinar today, be sure and let us know so we can see gauge interest levels and maybe ramp it up a little bit. So before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ANRC and what we do here. ANRC is an advanced cybersecurity training, consulting, and solutions provider. We offer about 40 cybersecurity training courses that are currently being used by the government as pipeline training to train cyber analysts. Additionally, we offer cyber threat assessment consultants for Fortune 1000 companies where we conduct an intense security assessment to identify areas of concern that's not protected by technology. And then finally, we offer products and solutions, one of which was showcased at DefCon 2 years ago, which Remy was responsible for. It's called MacoViz, and he'll show you that on the slide coming up here in a second. So that's an online iOS binary disassembler that you can use through a browser, which is pretty cool. Our speaker today is Remy Baumgarten. He is our lead cybersecurity engineer here at ANRC. He's also developed both our iPhone and Android mobile security classes, which covers development, exploitation, and reversing on the phone platforms. One other thing that he's gotten really good accolades for has been the MacoViz tool that we made freely available to the public, and that's where we gave our DefCon talk 2 years ago. So just some general guidelines here for you during the webinar. I'll be monitoring the chat window since we can't hear you in the audience. So if you have any questions during the webinar, just send them through the chat window or the questions window that you have there. And I'll either answer those questions for you myself, or I'll pass them off to Remy if I can't at key points in the presentation. If we don't get to your answers, rest assured we will answer them via email after the webinar. So we log all the questions and we'll follow up with you. And one last thing, additionally, you'll have the chance to download the slides and the recorded broadcast of this webinar afterwards. So I will email both those links to you as well. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Remy and let him get started. Go ahead and take it away, Remy.
Great. So hi and welcome everyone to ANRC's webinar on iOS security. But before we begin, let me just introduce myself a little bit. I am a lead security engineer at ANRC Services. We provide, like Nathan said, consulting, training, and products. And if you want some more information about that, please visit our website for more information about those services. I'm also the course creator, again, of the mobile class offerings, and I really enjoy doing research and development. Spoken at a number of conferences you can see here. And I'm just going to show you a quick screenshot of MacoViz, but I highly recommend you take a look at it online or check out the YouTube video. Also, please feel free to follow us on Twitter for the latest news, research tool releases, and future webinars. And then, again, if you have any questions during the talk, just feel free to put them in the chat box. So this is a little brief overview of what MacoViz does. Again, highly recommend taking a look at it. It's a reverse engineering platform for the web. This tool allows you to basically dissect an iPhone or Mac binary and then visually walk through the file. It also, as you can see at the bottom right-hand corner, detects and isolates or locates potential security-related violations. The YouTube link is right there. If you don't have time to grab that, just download the slides. We'll be sending those out over email after the talk. So today's theme is about how you could best protect yourself in different environments, either if you're at home, work, or abroad. This theme is tied into the whole talk while touching on other topics like iOS security, and then the state of the current jailbreak scene, MDM security concerns, and then finally kind of a look at different types of iOS backups and why they're important to protect and what's inside of them. We will be covering a lot of topics today, so we won't get too deep into technical detail, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have regarding more technical questions at the end. So Apple's done a great job, at least comparatively to other mobile operating systems that are popular. They built the iPhone to be secure from the get-go. However, of course, with all operating systems, humans created it, so there's going to be flaws. Over the years, these flaws have become increasingly harder to find and even harder to exploit. So I've provided about 10 security tips to lock down your phone in order to prevent malicious code, adversaries, and snoops from looking at your personal or enterprise data. I also added parentheses after each tip to include whether this tip is applicable to your home, to your work, or abroad. So if you see a parentheses H or a parentheses W, just know that it's for home, work, or abroad. So the first tip I want to bring up is something that you all should be very familiar with. We're going to start kind of basic here, and just make sure that your phone's up to date. And second, make sure that you use something a little stronger than a 4-digit passcode, because if an attacker can guess a 4-digit passcodes at 12 per second, the entire space of 10,000 possible pins could be guessed in about 13 minutes. And even if they could only do 1 per 5 seconds, it's still only 14 hours. The third tip is to never connect to a public wireless network, whether it's paid or free. And I'm including coffee shops, airports, hotels, and definitely security conferences. It's basically trivial to bypass or perform attacks against the users on a shared Wi-Fi networks. And then fourth, when you go to other countries or you're forced to use public Wi-Fi, you definitely want to use protection. So get a VPN provider that you trust. There's a few out there that don't gather any logs, and you probably want to put that in your home country, especially if you're going to certain places that that watch and monitor your stuff. Basically, this will encrypt all your data from your phone to the VPN server. Some people, like my mom, always leave their screen on for reasons I don't understand. Setting an auto lock to a lower interval, about 1 minute there, or anything 5 minutes or less, will lessen the chance of data theft, as it will lock and require a password or a fingerprint after the interval expires. To prevent brute forcing of passwords, you definitely should enable the erase data option. That's going to be off by default, which will basically wipe the device after failing about 10 tries. So what you need to do is understand is that erase data option doesn't actually wipe the data on the phone. It just erases a data protection cryptographic key. So once that key is gone, the data becomes useless. Just make sure you have a secure backup in case your kids get a hand on your phone. So crime statistics for iPhones have actually gone down since the introduction of this feature, number 7, Enable Find My iPhone. This basically allows you to remotely erase the phone if it's stolen. The New York City reported that grand larcenies, which is considered theft over $400, have decreased 29% as of mid-2014. Robberies of iPhones have also decreased 19%. So Find My iPhone has been credited to the decrease of theft by New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. An important thing to note that goes behind the scenes is that the phone does not actually wipe itself. Again, it's just using that cryptographic key and deleting it. So even if the phone is stolen and someone tries to install a new fresh operating system on top of it, the thief's still going to be stuck at an activation screen. So it's effectively a dead brick. Just remember, do you have this, that you enable this feature in your iPhone's preferences? To access it, you simply log into iCloud from anywhere, and then that will allow you to locate your device, make it beep, or wipe it. It's also recommended to call authorities instead of trying to locate where your phone is and possibly running into a potential thief, for obvious reasons. The 8th security tip I have for you today is the use of Apple's configurator tool. This is freely available for download in the App Store for your Mac. It also allows you to set permissions and restrictions for the use of your device. You can kind of see a little bit on the screen right here. Some of the things it offers is allowing iCloud backups, FaceTime, location services. It also allows you to mandatorily select, a certain length of a passcode. So if you're giving this phone to your kids or another employee, you could make those specifications in the form of an Apple configurator profile. Tip number 9 relates to those of you who are using an MDM provider at work or are thinking about using one. For those of you who don't know, MDM, it stands for mobile device management. There's a bunch of companies that work in this space. Besides the features already mentioned in the Apple configurator tool, MDM solutions give you the ability to containerize sensitive information so no leakage of information is possible. That is theoretically. So certain things MDM providers would do would be like secure email, messages, data, file sharing, and so forth. Finally, tip 10 is new as of like last week. This is basically a new service Apple just started making available. It's two-factor authentication by Apple, and it also prevents unknown or new devices from logging into your Apple ID account to access basically all your information, including your backups, text, images, App Store purchases, and more. So if you enroll in this program, you're going to be a lot safer against certain types of attacks, like the celebrities a few months ago ran into, where people guessed their Apple ID password and all their nude pictures were all over. So this definitely helps prevent those types of attacks because someone's going to have to use a two-factor authentication to actually log in your account. So I've tested this for the last few days, and while it's somewhat annoying to use when you first get it and you have multiple Apple devices like myself, once it's all set up, it's actually pretty easy to use, and it doesn't you don't have to like use too many prompts at all. If you want to enroll in this, and again I highly recommend you do, just go to that link at the bottom or just search for two-factor authentication for Apple on Google. Okay, so this next section is talking about iOS 7 versus iOS 8 security. And basically we're talking about the improvements of iOS 8 compared to that of iOS 7. Basically with the release of iOS 8, many bugs were patched, about 53 of them in total. And those were all vulnerabilities that presented potential attack vectors that could allow the installation of malware or stealing of information. If you haven't upgraded to iOS 8 yet, you may be vulnerable to those attacks still because Apple doesn't always update them. Enterprise environments obviously should always keep their employees' phones up to date to prevent these types of breaches, since Apple doesn't protect those old operating systems. If you're interested in the specific CVEs that were patched, just ask me after class, and I have a whole list of all the details and everything you'd like to know. Some of the vulnerabilities, though, at a high level include remote code execution, WebKit exploits, that's what Safari is based on, ASLR bypasses, that's a security mechanism to prevent exploits, and then Wi-Fi password interception. So there's some pretty big bugs that you definitely want to update if you haven't done so far. So Apple actually went above and beyond this and not only patches vulnerabilities, but they introduced something called better data protection. In iOS 7 and before, certain types of data were not even encrypted. So this included text, emails, attachments, and more. They got a little bit of a backlash from the FBI and law enforcement, and they said that Apple went a little too far with this, and it prevents them from acquiring their target's data. So, take that as you will. But on a side note, when I was in Australia before this whole thing happened, I talked to a lot of different law officers and then forensic analysts that were asking, we're having a lot of trouble talking to Apple and getting this information in a timely manner. Is there any other way we could do this? They said that Apple's really slow and overburdened by these requests, so I think Apple just got fed up and they're like, you know what, we're just going to lock it down. These people are asking for more privacy anyways, so I think it worked out in the end. Here's some news articles recently about what the FBI and law enforcement saying about the new protections in iPhone. The director of the FBI and law enforcement have publicly criticized Apple for their push to end user privacy against seizures. But there's still caveats to this, and they're not talking about that too much in the articles. But if you dig a little deeper, one of the caveats is use of iCloud. So if you read the quote really carefully in the first news article, Apple says, so it's not technically feasible for us to respond to government warrants for the extraction of this data from devices in their possession using iOS 8. So just note that that's from devices in their possession. That has nothing to do with iCloud at all. There's all these people are storing information in iCloud, including their entire phone backup. So I'll get into details of what those backups include at that last section of our talk, but just note that they don't even need that. If they don't even need that either, because all they have to do is just talk to the phone company if they just want to get call logs and text messages. Those are going to be a lot easier to get than going through Apple. Also, just another side note is Apple actually has a crypto key for your data that you store in iCloud, so that information is definitely not private to you. iPhone data protection or encryption, as I already mentioned, covers many more files compared to that of iOS 7. Just some more extensive lists right here. That includes photos, messages, email, contacts, notes, iTunes contents, reminders, attachments, and call history. They're all now encrypted using the iPhone's encryption chip. And they use the encryption chip, and they're the only cell phone manufacturer that actually does this. And they did it for power consumption minimization. They also introduced another thing, a warning that allows you to select on your phone if you trust the device that you're plugging into. So this is called device pairing or device trusting, and it's basically a response to a technique that we use in my iPhone class, and it's also publicly available on the internet to extract files in the phones that should remain private. This attack, called the evil girlfriend attack, works by monitoring the USB slot by use of a script to see if the iPhone is connected to it. When an iPhone is connected, the script would run and copy out critical files like your SMS database, application databases, and then other private files. Basically, after that, it would push a malicious binary onto the device. So we took it a step further in iPhone class, and we created a hidden startup script that would actually call our binary periodically on cron to exfiltrate information from the device to a web server. This doesn't work anymore because of device pairing and the data encryption enabled. So Apple claims they do not have the encryption keys to bypass the protection and thus cannot give law enforcement access to the data they used to be able to. Tim Cook specifically said, "We have never worked with any government agency from any country to create a backdoor in any of our products or services, and we will never allow access to our servers." And then he also said, unlike our competitors, that's kind of like a punch to Google, Apple cannot bypass your password and therefore cannot access this data. Again, that's all true if we're talking about the device, but we're not talking about the device here. We're talking about iCloud, and iCloud is definitely open for them to take a look at. A little bit more information on the rate of these requests. This chart is a 6-month period from January to June 2014, and it depicts the total amount of law enforcement requests that Apple received during the time frame for different countries, and you can see that USA is definitely the highest by far. USA has a total of 4,132 device requests within 6 months for 13,743 devices. So they kind of group a bunch of devices in a request, whether they're going after a gang or some kind of organization. They'll make a request for 500 devices or something. So only 3,431 of those device requests resulted in obtaining data, or about 83%. So this is a little bit misleading since Apple states that 93% of those device requests were for stolen phones, while only 7% were actually data requests containing pictures, images, location, and email. So all in all, less than 0.00385% of all Apple customers have had data disclosed due to government information requests. But again, this is just law enforcement, and we're not talking about federal data requests, which I don't think they could publish that kind of information. Speaking of forensic investigators, if any of you guys are out there right now, this might be interesting to you. There's been, some changes in the way that Apple stores the locations of their applications, So first of all, many of the old tools won't work unless they're updated for iOS 8. Again, this is because of the change in the locations. Apple-owned applications like Messages, Safari, iBooks, and all the stuff that comes normally with your phone, those are still located and always have been located in the /applications directory. And those are usually unencrypted by default. But all other downloaded apps from the App Store are in these new locations that you can see right here. So the next section right here talks a little bit about the jailbreaks. And no iPhone, or for that matter, smartphone talk is complete without the current state of the jailbreak. It's an exciting area. It kind of shows you the potential of what these devices could do. It also shows a big hole in the security of the product as well. So for those of you who are not familiar with what jailbreaking is a form of privilege escalation. In this case, it escalates from the user mobile, who has low privileges, to root, that's full privileges. This allows the user to gain full control over the operating system to modify it to his or her liking. In other words, jailbreaking is the process of removing restrictions on iOS through the use of software and hardware exploits, which I'll show you in a second. Such devices include iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, Apple TV even, and pretty soon maybe the Apple Watch and even the Apple autonomous vehicle. Yeah, and if you haven't heard of that, Apple's actually working on an Apple car or some kind of operating system that's going to be put into cars, so that's going to be an interesting area as well. For iOS 8, there's 3 popular jailbreaks that were released. The first one, Tag. You can see which versions they're working up to right there. 8.1.3 is the newest version that Apple released, and they patched all these vulnerabilities. So unless you have an older operating system installed on your phone, these jailbreaks are going to work. Apple has since patched them again since the latest iOS release was it was about 2 weeks ago, I think. All jailbreaks since the first version of iOS came out basically use a jailbreaking methodology. They first basically find a sandbox vulnerability, because all applications are contained within this little environment called a sandbox. And then they write an exploit for it to break out of the jail or the sandbox that's enforced by the iOS kernel driver called sandbox.kext, which is a kernel extension. The next step is to obtain code execution by exploiting a valid Apple-signed binary already on the iOS device by default. Once the code execution is obtained, the next step is to basically obtain root or privileged access by exploiting any code, by exploiting an Apple-owned daemon that already has root privileges. Finally, they patch the kernel, so this process does not have to be repeated each time the phone is being rebooted. Usually what they do is they also patch the code signing mechanism so that any code can run unsigned. This is typically because third-party apps, like the ones you install from Cydia, or basically that's a third-party app store, after you jailbreak your phone, all the code in there, all those binaries are not going to be signed by Apple because it's not from the App Store. This brings up a good point of why you should never jailbreak your own personal phone. Do you really want to have the ability to have unsigned code running on your phone, especially if it's not approved by Apple? That's really up to you, but I don't recommend doing that. Once you jailbreak, you basically open the doors to exploitation either at home, work, especially abroad, when you turn off security mechanisms that are freely offered to you by Apple. Jailbreaks don't last forever, so once a new version of iOS comes out, you can't really downgrade to an old version because they stop signing the old IPSW, which is iPhone software update or iPad software update. And so basically this prevents reverting back to an old version of iOS to jailbreak the device. This is because an adversary would be able to downgrade your phone to jailbreak it and then install malware without you realizing it. So they wanted to prevent that form of attack. Furthermore, the most dangerous iOS malware out there is only limited to jailbroken phones. One of the samples I looked at a few years ago dealt with a piece of malware that was a worm for iOS, and the way that it spread was it would scan the internet on port 22 to try to find these devices, and once it found a device that I thought was an iPhone SSH daemon running from a jailbroken phone, it would connect to it and then type in the default password, which on all jailbroken phones the default password for root is Alpine with a capital A. So it spread by that method as well. And once it was able to log in, root on SSH, it's pretty much game over. Jailbreaks are definitely becoming more complex in nature. Typically, only one major jailbreak is released per major version of iOS. Sometimes the vulnerabilities that are discovered in the developer preview of iOS. Other times they're also discovered in, for example, iOS 7 and then held onto secretly for the release of iOS 8 with the hope that Apple does not find it. This technique allows the user to upgrade to the next version instead of being stuck in the previous version. So Pingu is kind of an example of a current, well, it's useless since it's patched, jailbreak for iOS 8. This particular jailbreak used 4 CVEs, and they chained them together. It basically demonstrates that the complexity of jailbreaks is increasing, and the cat and mouse game of Apple versus jailbreak scene is ongoing. If you want more technical details about any of these jailbreaks and how they work, I kind of have a little thing written up of the steps that they take at a high level and what CVEs are included. Let's see. And so another popular jailbreak for iOS 8 is Tag. This jailbreak uses 4 different vulnerabilities to accomplish the same goal. And Pingu and Tag share the use of one exploit, in particular relating to the kernel function that controls the light sensor on the phone. You also maybe have heard me speak about third-party apps, Cydia. If you're not aware of what that is, typically what happens after you jailbreak a phone is that a third-party app store is installed, and that store is called Cydia. And Cydia basically contains apps and other modifications, as well as command line software. The contents of the store are not really screened like the way that Apple screens them against malicious code, and they may be somewhat risky. If you're familiar with Debian, then you'll recognize that Cydia uses the apps tool, advanced package tool, to install Debian packages, and that's pretty much how you package something up and deploy it through the Cydia store. Well, Apple may limit use of the certain functionality in iOS, like they don't let you use private frameworks on iOS, and there's a bunch of things that you're just not allowed to do. Cydia allows you to basically install any software that has full reign and control over the entire system if you wanted to. In this section, I just want to briefly touch on the future of jailbreaks so that you're aware of how to protect yourself, whether you're at home, work, or abroad. The world of jailbreaks just became a lot more exciting with the reintroduction of the debug pin. The debug pin, which was only there in older iOS devices with a 30-pin connector, the first picture here on the top, that's the old iPhone adapter, that allowed hackers to obtain kernel debug console access, which makes finding exploits much easier. The second picture on the bottom is very similar to what I did a few years ago. And we basically were able to, make a breakout board and connect it to the phone to gain debug access to the device itself. Since Apple changed over to the Lightning cables, that hasn't been possible. So a lot of these guys have been doing is taking a older phone and then trying to install a newer version of iOS on it because they need the debug to pin to do these jailbreaks. But as we get further and further out of through these generations of different iOS devices, it's going to be increasingly harder to install a new version on an old phone. And in fact, the iPhone 4, it's without the S, doesn't allow you to install iOS 8 on it. So you might have to hack in order to get that thing installed and use that pin. But up until a few weeks ago, it wasn't possible on these new phones. So this guy named Ramtin Amin discovered a way to make it work again. Basically, Apple has this protection mechanism called MFI, and MFI is a program that Apple has to allow accessory developers, like if you have an iPhone speaker or a Bluetooth earpiece, you would register with MFI developer program, and that will give you access to get an accessory and a special chip in order to communicate with these devices. So Ramtin was able to find a way around this protection, and he's actually going to be selling this component to the public soon on his website. His website's at the bottom there. And there's a lot of more information and more detail about how he did this, and more information if you want to purchase it on his website. But I'll summarize basically what he did. And basically, with just like the 30-pin connector, we wanted to gain access to the serial port, which is used for debugging. And then there's a few different types of Lightning connectors out there, but the one that we're really interested in is the serial, which is the C10C serial connector, and that's the one that we're going to be using for debugging. He was also unable to buy a C10C connector because, again, you need a license agreement with Apple to purchase it. So he bought someone else's, accessory device, and he acquired the MFI chip out of it, and he started hacking with it. And he basically took that knowledge and then put a board together and This is a picture of the actual boards he's creating with the C10C connectors. And then once he was able to connect it to the phone, he was able to obtain that debug console. So what does this really mean? Well, it means that a lot of new jailbreaks are going to be coming soon because of the ease of access, and there's going to be a lot more potential eyes looking at this code itself, especially at the bootloader level. So I'm thinking that, iOS 8, we might even have another jailbreak coming soon for this major release. Definitely iOS 9. They're not going anywhere. So why do we care about this? Well, enterprises using MDM solutions shouldn't rely on the ability for those MDM solutions to actually detect if one of their devices is jailbroken. It's basically going to become less and less effective. Also, again, individuals should be aware of where they plug their phone in to, as backdoors can be injected, similar to the evil girlfriend attack. What we could do is take a Raspberry Pi, install an operating system on there, connect it to someone's phone that looks like a charger, and then we'll go ahead and jailbreak the phone. So, with the device pairing, it's a good thing. Just, always keep an eye on your phone. In this section, we will discuss MDM for work environments and basically give you some food for thought here. The entire idea of detecting jailbroken phones using MDM software is just basically a cat and mouse game. The jailbroken phone will always be one step ahead, since they basically control the entire device and can tell the MDM software and also the MDM server that the software is communicating with anything it wants to hear to make it happy. So you cannot effectively ask a phone if it's rooted, if it's already compromised. It just doesn't make sense because it could tell you anything it wants to tell you. The device is already not trusted. So Apple actually realized this a while ago and removed an API they had in there for jailbreak detection for this very reason. Yet the MDM providers are still trying to do their best to detect this. There's a program I'm going to show you soon here that shows you an example of this in action. So there's this tool called XCon. It's freely available on the Cydia store. And basically what it does is it hooks different application API calls, but it also hooks system calls as well. And it supports everything up to the latest and greatest, iOS 8 and ARM64 support. And here's a little chart of what that looks like right here. So you can see that about half of them are patched, and this chart's constantly changing. You can see that AirWatch, that's an MDM provider, Capital One, Good, Enterprise, iBooks, and all these apps basically check to see if the phone's jailbroken, and if it is, it's not going to function correctly. You'll also notice that some apps like movie sites check for jailbreak detection. You can see that Redbox is there, TiVo's there, Maxis Movies, those are all movies, and those have like certain types of DRM policies. So these aren't typically for your own safety, but it's kind of a function of the DRM policy. That's basically to protect their content from being stolen. This is a little quote from XCon just to give you an idea of what their mission statement is. At first, the project aimed to patch applications at a per-app basis, but now it uses lower-level hooks to cover any apps that attempt to use the same procedure. So even patching apps that are not explicitly reversed by developers. So essentially, their idea is instead of updating their patches for every single version that, for example, AirWatch pushes out, they're just going to sit there and hook lower-level system calls. So it's kind of like a catch-all to basically, catch all those different types of detection mechanisms that apps might have in store for you. This project is closed source. It used to be open source, but it's harder to play a cat and mouse game when you're giving all your answers away to the people that are trying to stop you from doing it. Just a little bit more about the ways that these apps try to detect compromised devices. As far as MDM goes, some are really simple, just like locating jailbreak artifacts or trying to connect to existing services that only jailbroken phones have. And then some are a little bit more complicated. But these are the main ones, these 6 right here. One of them checks for the existence of directories. So like different types of applications like to check to see if you have an application in the location applications/cydia.app. If that's there, it's going to know that, hey, Cydia is installed. This is definitely a jailbroken phone. And there's also a few other locations that are only there or created when you jailbreak your phone, like /private/var/stash. And there's a bunch of those out there. So that's a pretty easy check to see if something's jailbroken. Another check is directory permissions. It's kind of similar to checking the existence of directories, but it also checks the Unix file permissions of specific files and directories on the system. If you're familiar with the way that Objective-C works, it uses NS File Manager to work. It also could use C functions like statfs. The next one is process forking. Sandboxing in the sandbox daemon on iOS does not allow you to actually fork processes. So if you can fork a process, and you basically could say that that this phone is jailbroken. So basically, by checking the return process ID on fork, basically a rogue app will tell if that it's forked or not. The next one is SSH loopback connections. So this isn't really done a lot in too many applications, but if the application tries to make a connection to localhost and port 22 and the connection succeeds, then it's obviously jailbroken there. And then the use of the system function. So calling the system function with a null argument on a device with a jail will actually in the jail will return 0. Doing the same thing on a jailbroken device will return the value 1. So there's also ways to check this by checking whether the bin.sh exists, and that's only the case on jailbroken devices as well. And then the last one, which is by far the hardest to get around, is by using DYLD functions. So calling functions like DYLD image count and DYLD get image name to see which dynamic libraries are loaded. This is very difficult to patch for the reason that the patches themselves are part of the dynamic libraries. So that kind of gives you an idea of how XCon works. It's basically just API hooking, and essentially what that means is we are basically appending our own code to existing methods, which allows us to have full control over the operating system by redirecting the flow of function calls to our own code. I wrote a little snippet of code here. There's a lot of tutorials online of how to do this. It's called Cydia substrate hooking. You have to install that through Cydia, but this is basically a way to create your own tweaks or modifications of the operating system, as well as create full applications as well. So with this hook right here, basically we just declared that it's a hook by typing %hook, and then we basically hook this function called setCustomSlide to unlock text, and we replace the argument fp8 with the string literal denoted by the @swipe_me, and then we pass that parameter to the original function, so it continues on. So after we write that code, we basically throw it into this system called Theos, which is another free tool. The GitHub address is there. It's very simple to use and install. It basically is a makefile system that allows you to create a tweak. A tweak in this case means a hook. And once it does that, it will compile our application, and then it will go ahead and log in over SSH to the phone on our local network, and then go ahead and install it, and then it will relaunch something called Springboard, which is kind of like your Finder on your OS X. And then once it reloads, you can see that the phone itself says swipe me, because we passed that argument to that method that we hooked, instead of slide to unlock. The same method could basically be used to trick any application to do anything you want. So this includes MDM solutions, email clients, bank applications, anything you want. They're all at risk to this type of attack. And only a single jailbroken device is all that you needed. That's all that's needed to compromise the integrity of an enterprise MDM solution. So, you could send that MDM solution anything you want, and you could do anything from that phone since it's registered on the network already. So this section is about iOS backups, and in this section I'm going to talk about, a little bit about what's inside the backup, how do we read it, what tools are involved. Just so you know that there's an option in iTunes that allows you to encrypt your backups with passwords. I don't recommend you using iCloud to do backups at all for reasons I mentioned before about it's not very private. But definitely use the encryption ability in iTunes to encrypt your backup. If you don't do it, all your information is going to be vulnerable if your computer's attacked. So it doesn't matter how secure your phone is. If all your information is on your computer gets hacked or someone goes ahead and takes it, it's pointless. The second type of backup is an iCloud backup. As I mentioned previously, the iCloud backup is accessible to anyone who has your Apple ID and password. So basically, let's take a look at what an iPhone backup looks like. How we read it and what tools we need to view it. But just before I get into that, I just wanted to show you, if you're not aware, where this iCloud backup location is to see if you actually have it turned on. You would just go to your settings application and then click iCloud and then storage and backup and then just see if that iCloud backup's on. So that's basically the location of that. So there's a few tools out there that actually do this, the iPhone backup extraction, and you don't technically need a tool to do this. There's Python scripts that will do it for you, and you can even do it, without any tools. But I'll show you the reason why we want to use tools in this. It makes it a lot easier. But with both versions of backing up, both iCloud and computer backups can become readable using tools like the one shown here. This one has the ability to do both. Again, you're going to need your Apple ID and password to get a copy of the backup. And for locally stored backups, this program is also compatible with the way that iTunes backs up your backups, which is AS256 CBC. And without a conversion utility like the backup extractor, you'll get all the files, and they're going to be located in OS X under your library, application support, mobile sync backup directory. And if you're on like Windows, Vista 7 or 8, it's a little bit longer path, like app data, roaming, Apple computer, mobile sync backup. So there's different locations for those. But if you open up one of those directories, what you're going to see is one directory with tons and tons of files without any directories, and it's just the hash name. So it's really hard to figure out what file is what. So that's why you want to use one of these extraction tools. When you do a backup, though, there's certain things that are not backed up, like your system resources. If your phone is also jailbroken, you're not going to have any of that jailbroken stuff, like Cydia and all the applications that you install through Cydia. Those files are not going to be in your backup, your Apple backup at all. So if you do want to back that stuff up, you have to download a special kind of backup tool on the Cydia store that backs up jailbroken areas of your phone. I won't get too deep into this, but this basically talks about the way that the folders are named and differential backups, how they're appended. There's also 4 different files that every backup has. One of them is info plist, which is the specifics of the iPhone and OS, manifest, manifest plist, settings and information, and then status.plist, which is basically the backup state and preferences like the encryption and date. The file names themselves, when you look at them, as you can see in this picture, you can see that I have a bunch of backups here, and you're basically going to see this hash. It's a SHA-1 hash of the name together with the path and the domain. So in the example picture, or the example bullet I have here, it says home domain, and then there's a dash with the actual path of where that file is located. So if you SHA-1 those together, that's how they're getting those. That's how they're getting those hashes and putting it in the directory for you. Also, there's a lot of good stuff that you could play with in the backups directory if you want to take a look at it after the talk. Basically, one of the really interesting ones is the messages, which is sms.db. It's all the database files on iOS are using SQLite, which basically uses, if you create an application, you're going to be importing the SQLite API and the framework in order to be able to read and open these databases. So there's not really like a service that's running on the phone at all. It's just the application itself that accesses this data. And in order to see the contents of these SQLite databases, there's a really cool tool that's free for Firefox. It's a Firefox extension called SQLite Viewer. You can go ahead and download that, and then you could open up any of those database files that you extracted on your backup and take a look at the actual text messages or emails or anything you want. There's also this location information that you could extract as well. iOS collects the longitude and latitude coordinates of local Wi-Fi networks while you use your phone constantly. Basically, this information is sent to Apple every single day to build and update its geolocation database. So for the end user, this provides them with a quicker and more efficient way to find your current location as opposed to using GPS, since GPS is very power intensive. So this is a better method in order to save battery. Basically, in other words, when you check your location, it basically finds a cell tower and Wi-Fi networks around you, and then it will basically pinpoint and triangulate your approximate location. But if this file is stolen from your phone or from your backup, it can be used for kind of bad purposes. So just try to imagine the scenario where a backup is stolen and then the adversary wants to know where you've been in the last few weeks. So let's kind of run through that, how they do that right here. So basically, you could use a site like Google Maps or Batch Geo and extract that the information from the database, longitude and latitude coordinates, and then throw them up into one of these websites, and then it will go ahead and plot them on a map for you. And you could do this in real time too if you install malware on a phone and constantly be sending the updated version of the database to the bad guy. But basically, using this map, you could see the person being tracked was most likely visiting certain cities, and they probably traveled by aircraft because you can infer that there's a lack of markers along the route. So they might have had their phone up in the air at that point. Another cool thing you could do is correlate the location information with the metadata in your photos. So all the images taken by our camera by default contain geolocation data. So by combining the photos and the geolocations, you could actually map out where the pictures from the backup were taken and what locations they were taken, and have them presented an interactive map. So you can take a look at that map and click on a point, and it will show you the image there. You don't have to do any coding for that either. It's the websites take care of all that for you. So the more cool things that you could find in the iOS backup itself is going to be your keychain, which contains all your passwords and certificates, application data, a call history, your bookmarks and history, your email, and a whole lot more. Some of the data is not stored in an SQLite database, but is actually stored in something called a binary plist. So Xcode or Preview on Mac, when you press the spacebar on a plist file, it will actually translate that binary plist into something that's human readable. So that's all I have for today, but I just wanted to let you know a little bit about the iPhone class we offer. I really hope you enjoyed today's webinar about iOS security, and I'll be taking questions in a minute, but first I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the classes we offer. As Nathan said, we have about 40 classes, and most of those classes are very heavy hands-on, so 80% labs and only 20% lecture, and we try to keep these as current as possible using real-world applications and exploits. Most classes are 5 days long, and for this particular class, the laptops and the iPhones are provided for each student, and we cover a whole range of topics in various degrees of depth, starting with iPhone architecture and design, Objective-C development, Mach-O file format, iPhone forensic overview. We go, into ARM architecture and ARM assembly programming. You're coding ARM and compiling it and then running it on the phone. We also work on decompiling and reverse engineering iOS binaries to figure out what they're actually doing. And we make use of a little bit of the Mach-O-Viz tool there and IDA Pro, and some other tools that are available for reverse engineering Mac and iOS binaries. We also touch on iOS security, and then we do some hacking labs like runtime injection, harvesting geolocation data, jailbreaking, and then also remote mining of iOS devices by creating, your own malware as well. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Just feel free to text Nathan if you have any questions.
Nothing so far here, Remy. So I think you're ready to go.
Cool. And just to close out today, just wanted to show you just really briefly of what the backup looks like. So when you actually do the backup, this is what a backup folder looks like with all these hashes in here. You can see how long it is, and they all kind of don't even, they just say text document because it doesn't know what it is. But there's those 4 files here at the bottom: the info, plist, the manifest, and then the status. So once we actually convert this backup to a human readable form, this is what the backup looks like here on the right. And you can see that there's a lot of different areas right here: call history.database, cookies, preferences. Here's your SMS database. So you could go ahead and open those, and you could see what's in all of it. So it's a really good way if you want to play around and learn what's on your system without jailbreaking your phone, and take a look at that.
All right, excellent information there, Remy. Thanks for attending our webinar today, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and found it extremely useful. Again, we'll be emailing you guys with the links for the slides that you can download, and also the recorded broadcast that you can download if you'd like as well. After you close out here, you're going to get a short 3-question survey so that we can improve in the future. So we'd be appreciative if you could fill that out for us. And with that, thanks for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and let us know if we can help you in the future. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.